You don't have to pity me, she whispered to the stranger at the cafe, not knowing. He was the millionaire CEO who built her rehab center. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories.
You're doing
Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to today's main character. The rain had been falling since dawn, the kind that soaked the city in silver and made every streetlight look like a candle behind glass. Inside Hazel and Bloom Cafe, soft jazz hummed through the air, and the windows fogged with warmth. It was the kind of morning that made people linger, except for one woman sitting alone near the corner, her hands folded neatly on her lap. Her name was Venessa Hart, 27 years old, wearing a faded green coat and a calm expression that did not quite hide her nerves. Next to her chair stood a lightweight wheelchair, clean, discreet, almost invisible if you did not know to look. She hated when people noticed it first. Venessa checked her phone again. The message from her therapist read, "Let us meet at Hazel and Bloom, 9 a.m. Lewis." She was early, as always. Time had become the one thing she could still control. Across the cafe, a man entered, shaking rain from his dark hair. Tall, mid-30s, in a gray shirt rolled up at the sleeves. He looked out of place among the morning crowd, too quiet, too self-contained. When their eyes met, Vanessa's pulse skipped. Something about his face familiar, serious, made her think of trust. She hesitated, then smiled and waved. "Dr. Lewis?" The man blinked, slightly caught off guard. There was a pause, the kind that stretches long enough to feel like a choice. Then he nodded once. "That would be me." And just like that, the first mistake was made. He took the seat opposite her, setting down a folder that clearly did not belong to a doctor. It was a sleek black portfolio with embossed initials, DP. But Venessa, too focused on hiding the tremor in her hands, did not notice. "I really appreciate you meeting me outside the clinic," she said softly. I cannot stand that smell of disinfectant anymore." The man, David Parker, watched her for a moment. He had come here only to escape a meeting across town, to breathe for once without being surrounded by shareholders and strategy boards. Yet now, this stranger was looking at him as if he were someone she could trust with her most private thoughts. "No problem," he replied, voice calm, measured. "Sometimes a change of scenery helps." Venessa smiled faintly, pulling out her sketchbook. "I have been trying to draw again. It is silly, but it makes me feel alive." Her pencil moved shakily across the page. David caught sight of the words written at the top, "Still breathing." Something flickered in his eyes. He did not know why, but the phrase felt like a confession he had never said out loud. The barista arrived with 2 cups of coffee. On Vanessa's cup, the lid carried the cafe's printed quote of the day, "Still breathing." She laughed quietly. What are the odds? Maybe the universe has a sense of humor. David looked down at his untouched cup. Maybe it has a message. Their eyes met again. The air between them tightened. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Then Venessa leaned closer and whispered, almost defensively, "You do not have to pity me, doctor. I get enough of that already." David froze. For a heartbeat, he considered correcting her, explaining who he really was, a millionaire CEO visiting the rehab center his company funded. But something in her voice stopped him. He simply said, "I am not pitying you." "Good," she murmured, gripping her cup tighter. "Because I am not broken. Just working on the pieces." The rain pressed harder against the window, streaking it like a moving mirror. For anyone watching, they looked like 2 strangers sharing coffee on a rainy morning. But for both of them, something unexplainable had begun, a meeting born from a mistake that would change everything. And somewhere, between the sound of thunder and the heartbeat of the city, the story of Venessa and David quietly began. The next morning arrived brighter, but the air still smelled faintly of rain. The streets of the city steamed as sunlight touched the wet pavement, and the cafe where they had met the day before looked completely ordinary again, except for the memory that lingered. Venessa had not been able to sleep. The words, "I am not pitying you," kept echoing in her mind. There was something about the way David said them, steady, quiet, almost too honest, that made her chest tighten. She told herself it was just a coincidence, a conversation with a kind stranger who happened to listen. Still, she could not stop thinking about him. When she arrived at Hope Springs Rehabilitation Center for her physical therapy session, the front desk was unusually busy. A group of staff members carried boxes of new equipment, and a banner hung near the entrance. Special guest visit. Hail Care Foundation, Annual Review. Venessa frowned. Hail Care? Why did that sound familiar? Inside the therapy room, she began her exercises as usual. The physical therapist, Martha, helped her secure the braces on her legs. "You are getting stronger, Venessa," Martha said, smiling. "Another few weeks, and you will be able to move from the chair to the walker by yourself." Venessa nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a man in a gray shirt walking past the hallway window. He turned slightly, and for a second, she caught a glimpse of a familiar face. Her breath caught. It was him, David. He was talking to someone in a suit, listening intently, nodding once in a while. She blinked, unsure if her mind was playing tricks on her. The same calm eyes, the same quiet presence, but here, in a place she had never expected to see him. Before she could ask, Martha spoke again. "Oh, that is one of the foundation representatives. They come once a year to review our funding. Big deal for the center. I heard their CEO might show up today too." Venessa forced a smile, pretending not to care, but her hands trembled as she held the parallel bars. Her reflection in the mirror showed a face caught between disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. That evening, she returned home exhausted. The rain had started again, tapping lightly against her apartment window. She opened her sketchbook, staring at the half-finished drawing of the coffee cup with the words, "Still breathing." Beneath it, she wrote in pencil, "The stranger at the café, Kumzek." She thought about how natural it had felt to talk to him, no awkward pity, no rehearsed comfort, just silence that understood. It was strange how someone she had known for less than an hour could feel so familiar. On the other side of the city, David stood by his office window in a high-rise tower, watching the same rain sweep over the skyline. He had not meant to run into her again. After their conversation, he had looked up her file only to realize who she was, a patient whose rehabilitation program his company had funded anonymously. The realization had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. He remembered her trembling voice. "I am not broken, just working on the pieces." Something in those words had reached the part of him that no board meeting or charity event ever could. His assistant knocked lightly on the door. "Sir, the board has been asking if you will attend the fundraising event at Hope Springs next month." David did not turn around. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think I should." Back at her apartment, Venessa closed her sketchbook and turned off the lamp. The city outside hummed softly, the rain still whispering against the glass. For the first time in months, she did not feel completely alone. Neither of them knew that the misunderstanding in the café was only the beginning, that their paths were about to cross again, in ways neither could have planned. And as the night deepened, the faint echo of piano music drifted from Venessa's room, a melody still unfinished, searching for the right notes, just like her heart. A week later, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the city washed clean and bright. The air smelled like new beginnings, though Venessa did not quite believe in those anymore. She was at the rehab center again, early as always, rolling her wheelchair toward the music room. It had become her favorite place, quiet, sunlit, and filled with the soft echo of old piano notes. When she entered, she noticed someone already there. David was standing by the window, reading a clipboard. He looked almost out of place, as if he belonged somewhere larger, somewhere louder. But there he was, sleeves rolled, a quiet focus in his eyes. Venessa froze. For a second she thought about turning around, pretending not to see him. But before she could, he looked up and smiled, just a small curve of the lips, calm and unassuming. "Good morning," he said. She hesitated, then replied, "You are here again. Do you volunteer here?" David paused. He could have told her the truth right there. Instead, he simply nodded. Something like that. Quote, Venessa's eyebrows lifted slightly, half amused, half suspicious. "You are a man of very few words, you know that?" He smiled again. "And you seem to have a lot of them." That made her laugh for the first time in days. The sound was quiet but real. She moved toward the piano, tapping one key with her finger. "I used to teach kids. Before everything changed." David sat down beside her, careful not to intrude. "Do you still play?" "Not as well as before," she admitted. "But music is forgiving. It lets you start over." He nodded slowly. "I think people are the same." Venessa looked at him, unsure what to say. There was something disarming about the way he spoke, measured, kind, but weighted with experience. As she began to play a few tentative notes, he listened in silence. The melody was fragile, incomplete, yet it filled the room like sunlight slipping through curtains. After a while, she noticed him looking at her hands. "Do not stare too much," she teased lightly. "It makes me nervous." "I was just thinking," he said, "how strong you are." Venessa smiled faintly. "Strong is not the same as fine." "No," David replied. "But it is the start." For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The piano carried their silence. Then a nurse entered the room, calling Venessa's name for her next session. She began to wheel herself toward the door, but David stood and gently took the handle of her chair. "Allow me," he said. Venessa hesitated, then let him. They moved through the hallway, passing the framed photos of patients who had recovered, each one a reminder of what she was still fighting for. At the therapy room door, she turned to him. "Thank you for not treating me differently." David's expression softened. "You do not need different, you just need honest." Those words stayed with her the rest of the day. Later that evening, Venessa sat at her small kitchen table, replaying the moment over and over. She had met plenty of people who offered sympathy, but David's calm understanding felt different. It was not pity, it was presence. She opened her sketchbook and added a line beneath her drawing of the coffee cup. It read, "Still breathing, Lesson 2. People surprise you. Gunt." Meanwhile, in his office across town, David stared at his laptop screen, a folder labeled Everlight Foundation. Patient stories open in front of him. Venessa's name appeared halfway down the list. He hovered over it, then closed the file without opening it. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. He wanted to know her story, but not like this. Not through reports or medical summaries. He wanted her to tell it herself. Outside, the night stretched quiet and long. Two people in the same city, separated by distance but drawn by something that neither understood. And somewhere in the silence, the faint echo of a piano melody, the same one from the morning, seemed to linger in the air, refusing to fade. The following week brought the first real warmth of spring. The air outside Hope Springs Rehabilitation Center carried the smell of blooming dogwoods, and the halls were bright with morning light. Venessa wheeled herself through the corridor, humming softly under her breath. For the first time in months, she was looking forward to her therapy session. Not because it was easy, but because lately David had been there. He never said much, never crossed a line. Yet somehow his quiet presence made everything feel less heavy. That day, she found him again in the music room, setting up a small speaker near the piano. "You are early," she said, smiling as she entered. He turned, a rare hint of humor in his voice. "I could say the same about you. I always come early. It gives me time to remember why I am doing this." "And why is that?" Venessa paused, fingers brushing across the edge of the piano. "Because I refuse to be defined by what I lost." David looked at her carefully. "Then what do you want to be defined by?" She smiled faintly. "By what I do next." He nodded, clearly moved, then pressed play on the speaker. A soft instrumental version of Clair de Lune filled the room. "Thought it might help," he said. Venessa closed her eyes for a moment. "It does. Debussy always makes pain sound gentle." She began to play along with the recording, her fingers hesitant at first, then stronger. David leaned against the wall, listening. There was something fragile, yet defiant, in the way she played each note, an act of endurance. After a while, she stopped and looked at him. "You know," she said, "I have seen you around here for days, and no one seems to know your last name." David froze for a heartbeat, then replied evenly, "Maybe that is for the best." "Secretive, huh? I knew there was something mysterious about you." He smiled faintly, but his eyes gave away a trace of unease. He changed the subject. "You are improving fast. Martha said you managed 6 steps with the walker yesterday." Venessa laughed. "I almost fell on the 5th one, but I will take that as progress." They shared a look that lasted longer than either intended. A knock interrupted the moment. The door opened, and one of the nurses peeked in. "Mr. Parker, the director would like to see you about the new funding proposal." Venessa's hands went still on the piano keys. "Mr. Parker?" she repeated quietly, eyes narrowing. David's body tensed. The nurse realized her mistake immediately and stammered, "I am so sorry, sir. I did not mean to—" "It is fine." David cut her off gently, his voice low. "Tell the director I will be there in a moment." The nurse nodded and left quickly. Silence filled the room. Venessa stared at him, confusion mixing with disbelief. "Parker," she said slowly. "Like, Hail Cares Parker?" David's jaw tightened. "Venessa, let me explain." She shook her head, hurt flickering behind her eyes. "Explain what? That you lied to me from the beginning?" "I did not lie. I just did not correct you." "That is the same thing," she said softly. Her voice trembled, but she kept her gaze steady. You sat here listening to me talk about my recovery, my fears, while you— She stopped, unable to finish. David stepped closer, his tone urgent but controlled. I wanted to know what this place really means to people, not through reports or statistics, through someone real, through you. Quote. Venessa laughed bitterly. So I was your case study? No, he said firmly. You were the reason I remembered why I started this foundation. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the faint echo of Claire de Lune continued from the speaker, haunting and slow. Venessa turned away, her voice barely a whisper. You should go, Mr. Parker. He hesitated, wanting to say something more, but the look in her eyes stopped him. Without another word, David walked out, the door closing softly behind him. Venessa sat alone, her hands hovering above the piano, trembling. Then she pressed a single key. The note rang out clear, pure, and heartbreakingly lonely. Outside, the dogwood petals drifted through the air, and for the first time in weeks, the sun felt cold. The next few days passed in silence. Venessa stopped coming to the music room. She arrived for therapy, kept her head down, and left as soon as her sessions ended. The nurses noticed the change but did not ask. The rumor of the misunderstanding spread quietly through the staff, though no one dared to mention it in front of her. David, meanwhile, had returned to his office on the top floor of the Hailcare building. The view of the city below looked endless, but somehow empty. Reports, contracts, and emails filled his desk. Yet every time he glanced at the stack of papers, he saw only her face, the look of betrayal in her eyes. His assistant entered with a hesitant knock. Sir, the board meeting for Everlight's expansion is in 10 minutes. David nodded absently. Cancel it. Reschedule for next week. But sir, I said next week. The assistant nodded and quietly stepped out. David rubbed his temples, leaning back in his chair. He had built an empire on logic, precision, and control. But now all he could think about was one woman who looked at him not as a CEO, not as a benefactor, but as a person. And he had broken that fragile trust. At the rehab center, Venessa finished her final exercise of the day. Martha clapped softly. You did 7 steps today. That is 1 more than yesterday. Venessa forced a smile. 1 more, 1 less. It all feels the same. You are allowed to be proud, you know, Martha said kindly. Venessa looked down at her hands. Pride feels heavy when your heart does not believe it. That evening, as she returned home, she noticed an envelope taped to her apartment door. There was no return address, only her name written in neat handwriting. Venessa Hart. Inside was a short note. You once said music is forgiving. I hope people can be too. D. Beneath the note was a small USB drive. Venessa hesitated for a long moment before plugging it into her laptop. A video began to play. It was a simple clip. David standing in an empty concert hall. The camera wobbled slightly as if filmed by someone on his staff. He looked uncomfortable, even vulnerable. He spoke directly to the camera. This is where I used to come when I lost my wife. She loved music, said it heals what medicine cannot. I created the Everlight program because of her. I did not mean to deceive you, Venessa. I only wanted to understand what healing really feels like, not from behind a desk, but beside someone who is living it. The video ended there. Venessa sat frozen, her fingers trembling over the keyboard. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to tell herself this was manipulation, another rich man's apology wrapped in sincerity. But when she looked at his face, the way his voice cracked on the word wife, the anger slipped into something quieter. That night, she dreamed of the café, of the first time she met him. The rain, the sound of jazz, the words, still breathing, on the coffee lid. When she woke, her sketchbook lay open beside her, the same words staring back. The next morning, she returned to the rehab center early. The halls were quiet, sunlight spilling across the floor. In the music room, she saw something new. Her old piano, polished and restored, with a small engraved plate on its side. It read, "For Venessa Hart, still breathing." Her breath caught. She ran her fingers across the words as if to be sure they were real. On the piano bench sat a folded letter. For every person who thought they had stopped living, this piano is proof that they have not. Play when you are ready, David. Quote. Venessa closed her eyes, tears forming but not falling. She sat down, her hands hovering above the keys. For a long time she did not move. Then she played the opening notes of Song for Tomorrow. The melody trembled, then steadied, filling the room with light. Far across the city, David stood by the same office window, hearing the faint echo through memory, and smiled for the first time in weeks. Some mistakes, he thought, are not meant to be fixed. They are meant to begin again. The day of the Everlight Foundation Gala arrived. The center was decorated with white lilies and gold ribbons, and the sound of quiet chatter filled the main hall. For most people, it was a celebration, a night to thank donors, to announce new programs, to show the world how far Everlight had come. But for Venessa, it felt like a test she had not studied for. Martha helped her adjust the elegant silver dress she had borrowed for the occasion. "You look beautiful," Martha said, smiling. "David will be proud to see you here." Venessa looked down at her hands. "That is not why I am going." "Then why are you?" Venessa hesitated. "Because running away will not heal anything." When she arrived at the center, flashbulbs flickered, and guests in black suits and glittering gowns filled the room. She moved quietly through the crowd, unnoticed, until she found a seat near the stage. A voice over the speaker announced, "Please welcome the founder of HaleCare and the Everlight Foundation, Mr. David Parker." The applause was immediate. Venessa's heart thudded in her chest as David stepped onto the stage in a black suit, calm and composed. But there was something different about his eyes, less distance, more warmth. He began his speech slowly. "When I created Everlight, I thought I understood what healing meant. I thought it was about science, about innovation, about giving people tools to rebuild their lives. But I was wrong." The room grew silent. David continued, his voice steady but heavy with meaning. "Healing is not just physical. It is about finding the courage to be seen again, even when you feel broken. It is about trusting that someone will see more than your scars." Venessa's throat tightened. She felt every word. He glanced briefly toward the crowd, and their eyes met for a single second. Then he said, "This year, we are dedicating a new space in the Everlight Center, a music room named after someone who reminded us all what it means to keep living." A small light turned toward the far corner of the stage, revealing the restored piano. The plaque shimmered under the spotlight. Venessa Hart Studio, still breathing. Gasps and applause filled the hall. Cameras flashed, but Venessa sat frozen. Martha nudged her gently. "Go," she whispered. Venessa's heart raced. She wheeled herself toward the stage, the noise around her fading until all she could hear was the echo of her own heartbeat. When she reached the piano, David stepped down from the podium and stood beside her. He spoke softly, just for her. "I was hoping you would come." Venessa looked up, eyes shining but steady. "You should have told me the truth." "I know," he said. "But I also know that if I had, you would never have let me see who you really are." She exhaled slowly. "Maybe, but honesty matters more than perfection." David nodded. "Then let me start with that. I am sorry, Venessa. Not for the mistake, but for the way I handled it." She studied him for a long moment, then placed her hands on the piano keys. "Then let us start again." The room fell completely silent as she began to play Song for Tomorrow. The melody rose gently, carrying through the hall like a confession in sound. The same tune that once trembled in private now filled a room full of people. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. David reached out his hand. Venessa looked at it, then took it. Together, they bowed under the soft golden lights. For the first time in years, she did not feel like a patient or a survivor. She felt whole. Later, as the guests mingled and the music swelled again, David whispered, "You once said you were working on the pieces. I think you just put them all together." Venessa smiled. "No," she said gently. "We did." Outside, the night was clear, the city lights flickering like constellations. For two people who met by mistake, this moment felt like destiny finally getting it right. The morning after the gala, the city felt quieter, as if even the air was still holding on to the music from the night before. Sunlight spilled across the skyline, washing everything in soft gold. Inside her small apartment, Venessa sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. For the first time in years, she was not afraid of silence. On her table lay a folded newspaper, featuring a photograph from the event. The headline read, "CEO David Parker honors patient who inspired Foundation's newest wing." Beneath the headline was a photo of them on stage, David standing beside her while she played the piano, their hands joined as they bowed. She traced the image with her fingertip and smiled faintly. "Still breathing," she whispered. Her phone buzzed. A message from David appeared. "Good morning, Venessa. I will be at the center around noon. There is something I would like to show you." Venessa typed back slowly. "I will be there." When she arrived, the staff greeted her with smiles and applause. For them, she was no longer just another patient. She was the symbol of what Everlight stood for: resilience, hope, and rebirth. But for Venessa, the attention still felt strange. She had never wanted to be anyone's story. She just wanted to live hers. David was waiting near the garden behind the center. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass, and a fountain trickled softly nearby. He turned when he saw her and smiled. "You look like someone who did not sleep," he said. She laughed. "I did not. Too many thoughts, I guess. Good ones, I hope. Mostly." She looked at him, curious. "So, what is this thing you wanted to show me?" David motioned for her to follow. They stopped near a small glass pavilion overlooking the water. Inside was a display. Photographs of patients, letters of gratitude, and in the center, a framed copy of the Everlight Pledge. Beneath it, a simple plaque read, "Dedicated to those who taught us that healing begins with listening." Venessa's eyes softened. "This is beautiful." David nodded. "We are starting a new program next month, music therapy sessions, patient-led workshops. I want you to lead the first one." She blinked. "Me? I am not a therapist." "No," he said gently, "but you are a survivor who turned pain into music. That is more powerful than any degree." Venessa's throat tightened. She looked down, trying to hide the tears forming in her eyes. "I do not know if I can do it." "Yes, you can," he said quietly. "Because you already are." For a moment they stood in silence, the sunlight reflecting in the glass around them. Then David added softly, "There is one more thing." He reached into his jacket and handed her an envelope. Inside was a deed of donation in her name, a scholarship fund for young musicians in recovery. Venessa looked up, stunned. "David, why me?" He smiled. "Because the world needs to hear more people like you, people who remind us that broken does not mean finished." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She tried to speak, but no words came. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. "I do not know what to say," she finally whispered. "Say yes," he said softly. "To tomorrow, to everything that comes next." She laughed through her tears. "Then yes." Quote, "A breeze swept through the garden, carrying the scent of rain even though the sky was clear. Somewhere inside the building, someone was playing a piano, one of the patients practicing her song from last night." Venessa turned to listen, her expression full of quiet pride. David looked at her, and for the first time he did not see a patient, or even the woman who had challenged him. He saw an equal, someone who had reminded him what purpose truly meant. As the music drifted through the air, Venessa whispered, "It sounds like hope." David nodded. "That is exactly what it is." And for both of them, standing there beneath the morning sun, hope no longer felt like a dream, it felt like home. The following month arrived quietly, the kind of soft transition that only spring could bring. The Everlight Center had never been busier. Every hallway hummed with life, with laughter, with the sound of music spilling faintly from the new studio. Venessa had agreed to lead the first session of the music therapy program. She spent the previous week writing lesson notes, polishing the piano, and trying to convince herself she was ready. But the truth was, she was terrified. Standing in front of others meant more than teaching, it meant letting people see her again, completely and without the protection of fear. When the morning came, she wheeled herself into the new Venessa Hart studio. Sunlight danced across the polished floor. A group of patients waited, each holding a small notebook and a nervous smile. Martha, ever supportive, stood at the back of the room, nodding encouragement. Venessa took a deep breath. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice calm but shaking at the edges. "When I first came here, I thought healing meant walking again. But I learned that healing is about sound, about memory, about giving your pain a rhythm so it cannot silence you." Quote. She reached for the piano keys and pressed the first note. "Today, we are not here to play perfectly. We are here to remember that we are still breathing." The group listened in silence as she guided them through a simple exercise, each person pressing one note to represent a memory they wanted to release. The sound that filled the room was uneven and fragile, but somehow beautiful. Outside the glass window, David stood quietly watching. He had promised himself he would not interrupt, but his heart swelled with pride as he watched her command the space that once made her feel small. The woman who had once whispered, "You do not have to pity me," was now teaching others how to find their own strength. When the session ended, the patients applauded softly. One young woman, no older than 20, wheeled up to Venessa and said, "I did not think I would ever touch a piano again, but now, I want to learn." Quote. Venessa smiled through tears. "Then we will learn together." After everyone left, David stepped into the room. She looked up and greeted him with a tired but genuine smile. "You were amazing," he said quietly. "I was terrified," she admitted. "That is how you know it mattered." They stood together by the piano. The engraved plate glimmered under the sunlight, still breathing. Venessa traced the letters with her fingertips. "I never thought these words would follow me this far." she said softly. It started as a coffee cup, quote. Now it feels like a promise. David nodded. A promise you kept. She looked at him for a long moment. I do not think I could have done it without you. Maybe, he said. But you were the one who decided to show up. A quiet laugh escaped her lips. You always know the right thing to say. He smiled. That is only because you taught me how to listen. Quote. They shared a silence that did not need to be filled. The light shifted through the window, casting soft golden lines across the piano keys. Venessa sat down again and began to play Song for Tomorrow. This time, the melody sounded complete. David closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. It was not just a song anymore, it was a conversation, one that said everything words could not. When the last note faded, Venessa turned to him. You know, she said, I used to think my story ended the day of the accident. But now, it feels like it only just began. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a keychain shaped like a music note. Then, let us see where it leads. She took it, smiling. To tomorrow, she said softly. To tomorrow, he echoed. Outside, the fountain in the garden shimmered under the afternoon sun, and the sound of laughter floated through the halls. Inside the studio, the piano stood open, waiting for the next song because healing, Venessa now knew, never truly ended. It simply changed its tune. A year passed, almost without either of them noticing. The seasons turned quietly around the Everlight Center, spring into summer, summer into the soft chill of autumn. The garden outside the music studio bloomed and faded again, yet every day it still smelled faintly of hope. Venessa now walked with a light brace and a cane. She still used her wheelchair on long days, but the first time she had taken 3 steps unassisted, the entire staff had cried with her. Her progress was not a miracle. It was discipline, patience, and something that could not be measured, faith in herself. David had remained a steady presence in her life. He visited the center often, not as a CEO but as a quiet supporter who always sat in the back of her sessions. He never interrupted, never drew attention to himself, and somehow that made his presence even louder. One crisp afternoon, Venessa finished a class and stayed behind to tidy the sheet music. The piano gleamed under the golden light. She pressed one key absent-mindedly, smiling at the familiar echo. The door opened softly behind her. Still working? David's voice carried a warmth that made her turn. You know me, she said, laughing. I cannot leave a mess behind. Quote. He stepped closer, his hands in his pockets. You said the same thing about your life once. She tilted her head, curious. And what did I mean by that? That you could not leave it messy. Venessa smiled. Maybe I finally learned that a little mess is what makes life real. David nodded slowly. I like that. He placed a small box on the piano. It was simple, wrapped in ivory paper with a silver ribbon. Venessa raised an eyebrow. You know it is not my birthday. I know, he said. But today marks 1 year since you reopened this studio. I thought that deserved something. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a white ceramic coffee cup. On the lid, in the same font she remembered from that rainy morning long ago, were 2 words. Still breathing. Venessa laughed softly, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. You kept this? David smiled. The first one broke. I had another made. I thought maybe we both needed a reminder. Quote. She held the cup close, running her fingers across the letters. I think I did. The room went quiet except for the sound of wind brushing against the windows. Venessa turned toward him, her voice low but steady. You know, that morning at the café, I thought meeting you was just another mistake, but it was not. It was the start of everything that saved me. David's eyes softened. It saved me too. He stepped closer, gently placing his hand over hers on the piano. For a moment neither spoke. The silence between them was not heavy anymore. It was full of everything they had been through. Everything they had learned. Everything still to come. Venessa smiled. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had sat at a different table that day? Every day, he said quietly. And every day, I am grateful you did not. She looked down at their joined hands. So what now? David took a deep breath. Now we keep building. The foundation. The music program. Whatever comes next. Together, if you will have me there. Venessa met his eyes. Always. Outside, the sun dipped lower, turning the garden gold. The fountain sparkled, and a soft breeze carried the faint sound of piano notes from another room, one of her students practicing. Venessa turned back to the piano, her fingers gliding across the keys. She began to play Song for Tomorrow once more, the melody richer, more certain. David stood beside her, listening quietly, the same way he had that first day. Only this time, it was not about pity or guilt or curiosity. It was about love built on truth, shaped by forgiveness and strengthened by time. When the final note faded, Venessa whispered, "Tomorrow sounds beautiful." David smiled. "It always did. We just had to learn how to listen." The camera of the world could have faded there, two people, one piano, sunlight falling like a promise across their faces. Sometimes the best mistake is the one that teaches you how to begin again.